and welcome to this episode of The Brief. I'm your host, Meredith Reed. I'm here today with Amitabh Kumar, the founder of Social Media Matters, a group of feminist social media ninjas dedicated to creating safe online spaces. Ami is a true believer in technology and its many uses for positive change. Among other initiatives, Social Media Matters is currently working on an AI-driven digital parenting platform and other AI online safety solutions specifically for India. I'm also here today with Justin Davis, our very own co-founder and CEO of Spectrum Labs. So welcome to both of you.
Thank you, Meredith. Thanks for joining us, Ami.
Wonderful to be here.
So, Ami, just to get started, could you open our conversation by telling us a little bit about what inspired you to create Social Media Matters?
Well, I've been working in the feminist activist space for the last 12 years, and since the last 6 years, working very closely with tech platforms across the globe. So I serve on the safety advisory board of the likes of Facebook, Twitter, and other tech spaces. And Social Media Matters stems exactly from there. We realized how the world and also India is moving towards technology, and sadly, discrimination and issues of social injustice are also being carried over to the cyberspace. And that was a space where a group of us feminist activists, as you introduced, pretty much came up with the idea of Social Media Matters. And yeah, that's how it came into being.
That's great, and that's so important. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the initiatives that you've worked on at Social Media Matters?
Totally. So we look into 3 pillars of our work, stemming out of online safety, which we look into very comprehensively, which looks into cyberbullying, talks about positive cyber etiquette. We are focusing a lot on digital parenting, as it's a growing space, and we see it's once in a century chance where digital migrants are bringing up digital natives and all the positivity and conflicts that come with it. And also we find ourselves in the era of an infodemic, as they call it, with a lot of misinformation, fake news. So we raise awareness about it, and our methodology is doing research and then creating awareness content, plus going into the community and doing workshops with various members. And we focus a lot on India, but learn from all global players such as Spectrum, and Justin has been a great lead and somebody who's been guiding us for a while in this space as well.
And thank you for mentioning that. So that's the topic that we want to focus on today, the work that you've been doing with Spectrum Labs. So we're going to be talking about caste discrimination. And I was hoping you could start us off by telling us a little bit more about what caste discrimination is.
Caste discrimination is one of the oldest forms of social discrimination in India. There have been lots of PhDs done on it, a lot of research to try and understand how complex it is. In the shortest way to put it across, it's very similar to racism, where there are different castes in the Indian system. Primarily, there are 4, the top one being the priest and the lowest one being the workers. And then there is a group of people which are not even considered under the caste system, who are called the Untouchables. And they do all the menial jobs like cleaning the toilets, dealing with dead bodies. And this is how it stemmed from. I mean, it goes back into the Indian history, which is a couple of 1,000-year-old. And sadly, it has continued into the cyber age. So we are talking about it in 2020. where there is a lot of technology, a lot of positivity with technology. But sadly, somehow the Indian society has not been able to get rid of this ancient practice of discriminating against a group of people. The Indian law is against that, but culturally it is still practiced. And the caste of a person is determined by their last name, and a few people belonging to the lower castes are still dealt with the same hardships that they had to go through hundreds of years ago. Somebody very famous from India, our leader, Mr. Gandhi, worked against the caste system. Another major leader of India, Dr. Ambedkar, whose birthday is coming up on 14th of April, is also somebody who worked against it, but sadly, it still remains and is also observed on a lot of social media platforms and a lot of cyber communication in today's day and age.
And what are the legal implications of caste discrimination? What does the government do about all of this, or not do about caste discrimination?
Well, thankfully, the law is very, very strict. It's as strong as it can be. If you are discriminating towards anybody on the basis of caste, you can be put into jail. You have to pay a fine. Sadly, like with most Indian laws, it's the implementation which is lacking. And when it comes to the cyber world, you can imagine that it gets magnified to a degree where implementing it has become very, very difficult. So the law puts it out there quite straightforward that you cannot discriminate against anybody based on their caste, religion, race, or region. But as we know in human society across the globe, there is a lot of discrimination, and in Indian society, caste discrimination is one of the major forms of discrimination.
And just curious, real quickly, Ami, what does that look like to date in terms of the online detection and enforcement of caste discrimination? Has anyone really been successful at it? What are some of the specific challenges there?
There is a strong activist community, which is of the Dalit human rights activists. There are some great groups working to raise awareness about it. But let's just compare it to gender discrimination over here. It has become so normalized over a practice of literally 5,000 years, as some historians would put it, that people don't even realize that they are being discriminatory towards a particular caste. So that makes the matters extremely complex for all the social media platforms, or let's look at the larger tech companies coming out of San Francisco. It is an extremely complex form of abuse to understand, number one. Number two, the scale of it at times is huge. You will find some trends, you will find some very, very popular videos that are using caste discrimination in a very nonchalant and casual manner. And with million views, who do you prosecute or how do you bring it down is also complex when we look into the cyber laws of India at the current moment.
Interesting. Okay, so I'm trying to fully understand what this looks like, both in an online and an offline sense. So would you be able to go into a little bit more detail about what caste discrimination might look like for the everyday individual? And if you have, I want to put like a human side to this. So could you elaborate a little bit more about what that would look like in the real world?
Totally. I mean, the easiest comparisons are gender discrimination or racism, right? So there are a few terms, if you use them, they are only used in negativity. They are there in gender and they are also there in racism. And similarly in caste discrimination as well, there are a few castes of people which have been abandoned. You cannot use this terminology anymore. So, for example, calling somebody an untouchable, or I will not use those specific caste names because that might hurt somebody's sentiment. But if you use those particular caste names, you are kind of bringing back the years and ages of atrocities that a particular group of people had to go through. The women were not allowed to wear clothes. They were topless when they were working. They were used and raped by men of higher caste on a normal basis. Men were cleaning toilets. So manual scavenging still happens in India, and it is done by a particular caste. Similarly, with the trash collection and distribution, this is a job done by a particular caste. In Hinduism, after you die, your bodies are burnt, and this is also done by a particular caste. So all these menial jobs and the caste related to that, when you call somebody by this name, you are discriminating against them, and that is not allowed. The reference of that is also not allowed. And if you do that and somebody takes you to court, then you will be prosecuted in the ideal world. But sadly, in India, we don't see much of prosecution or much of use of this law. So while the community is extremely strong, on the legal side, there is always a lacking, and people from the lower caste feel discriminated till date, and are always trying to raise awareness about it.
So, Justin, Spectrum Labs is working with Social Media Matters and AMI on developing AI technology that will fight back against caste discrimination. Can you tell us a little bit about what brought you and AMI together and what you're working on now?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks again, Ami, for educating the listeners here on exactly what this problem is and who it impacts, and kind of how you're thinking about addressing that, both offline and online. Yeah, so we actually had a mutual friend in trust and safety now over at TikTok that introduced us together about a year ago or so, I think, Ami. But yeah, I mean, we've been, Ami and I have been staying in touch for quite some time around just the latest and greatest with AI and sharing ideas around trust and safety as it relates to many different behaviors that happen online that we all care about. And so Ami approached us maybe a couple months ago saying, hey, he was interested in trying to solve this particular problem around caste discrimination online across various different types of social platforms, whether it's some of the larger social networks or within smaller apps. But he was basically asking the question around, if we were to try and detect this behavior, how would we go about it? Who should I think about partnering with, and what would that look like? And of course, we at Spectrum jumped all over that. That's in our wheelhouse around how we operate as a business, right? We have 40 different or so behaviors that we've rolled out. Those behaviors are individual classifiers and models that are built with unique data sets within our proprietary cross-language, cross-vertical data vault. And then we have, a patent pending approach in the way we do that across many different languages. But really the thought there was, hey, we hadn't done a lot of work in that particular area. And so that was very exciting to us. How could we go about, launching this new model that could impact, 1 billion plus people, right? And that's very exciting, right? It speaks to the core mission that we're on, trying to make the internet a safer, more valuable place for people and for those companies. And I think it's in line with Ami's vision too. But we got really excited because before you go out and start building a model or an individual classifier for a specific behavior, for a specific language, it all comes down to the definitions, right? Before you even get to the data, you've got to understand, what is this behavior? What are some examples of caste discrimination? What are some examples of things that look like it but aren't? And where are the gray areas? And the beauty of working and partnering with Social Media Matters and AMI is, they were experts at this, right? They had the ability to quickly educate us on what that meant and how we might go about finding these types of data sets across the different verticals that we work with. So yeah, that's kind of how it all got started.
And Ami, did you have anything you wanted to add on to that about your side of this partnership?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, as I said earlier as well, it's been a great learning curve for us. We are a pretty old school group of activists, doing protests on the street, building capacities. That's where we come from. And when we look into the cyberspace, our approach has been that till, I was introduced to Justin and Katie and the whole team of Spectrum. And when we look at the scale of the cyberspace, then we realize that artificial intelligence is the way to go about it. And our understanding of artificial intelligence was very minimal and still is just at the beginning space. And we were really handheld throughout the process. The amazing part is, for me, which was the great learning, is the ability at which artificial intelligence can be customized, how comprehensive it is, and the amount of detail work that goes into it. I mean, we are in the beginning of really coming up with a comprehensive proposal and a comprehensive solution. And a lot of really fine, nuanced work has gone into it. I mean, in my team, I was lucky to have 4 people who have done PhDs on the caste system. So it wasn't just a Google search, but a really deep down part. And the great thing is that the tool that Spectrum has, or the ability they have to incorporate these different sorts of definitions, as Justin pointed out. So I think it's a great learning. It's an eye opener for even people like us who come from the activist perspective and look into trust and safety. I must say, I was very skeptical about AI a year back, but this whole year of schooling has really taught me, my team, and the group of activists we work with, that how this is the way forward. So it's been a great learning process, and I think caste is just a beginning, and we would definitely look into many other issues as well in this space and in the collaboration with the Spectrum.
Yeah, and look, it takes, for something as complex and as, in some cases, nuanced as caste discrimination, it requires, as you were saying, Ami, some extra context, right? It requires, where available, pending any sort of privacy or just availability of extra metadata like timestamped or gender or things like that. The systems need that extra context as well as the entire conversation, and it needs to be able to incorporate not just a handful of keywords or phrases or sentences or verbiage in that language, but it needs to be able to build up a score over time, and in order for it to detect something as complex as caste discrimination, because using some of the words on its own definitionally may not fall into that category. And so if you think about all the references of that are happening in real time, the billions and billions of signals across many different platforms where this type of behavior occurs, if you build the wrong systems in place, you would just inundate the moderation systems and workflow tools with all sorts of false positives and false signals of cases that weren't really caste discrimination. They were just the word that was being used in a normal sentence or for academic purposes, perhaps. So yeah, it's important to have the right tech that can go through and actually understand the nuances of these behaviors and look at an entire conversation or entire community, so to speak, in order to detect it at the scale that it needs to be done.
So speaking of the nuances and potential complications when you're trying to develop a model that is able to identify these behaviors, what are some of the potential complications that you might run into when you're dealing with text versus voice?
Yeah, I'll take that one first, and then Ami, I'd love to hear kind of your perspective. But yeah, I mean, look, doing the text piece of that is difficult in and of itself. You've got to have, again, the right context. You've got to understand what this person's saying, who are they saying it to, what's the context of that conversation, what's the history of that conversation, if there even is a conversation, or if it's just a single statement on a standalone post and where there is no threading. So all of those things are useful data points in understanding the text. When it comes to voice, there's a whole other separate set of challenges, and this isn't necessarily related to caste discrimination specifically, but just in general, voices very expensive to process. A lot of services out there are trying to transcribe the audio file, the voice, into text, and then run classifiers against the text output of that. But that, as we've seen just in our research, the precision and recall, or the accuracy of applying any sort of machine learning to transcribe voice to text is still lacking, right? It'll probably get there over the next few years, but for now it's just insufficient. And so the additional challenge there is trying to run the classifier. If you build a model for caste discrimination for audio, again, you've still got to understand the context. Who is saying the attribution of that audio file is just so important. Who is that person? What are they saying? Why are they saying it? Who are they saying it to? And in what form or what context is that phrase being said? That's just a phenomenally hard problem. So you've got to make sure that you've got the right capture of what was said and the attribution of who said it in that particular context. But yeah, I mean, they both have their challenges. Voice just comes with an additional complexity of just trying to build a model for something where there may not be a ton of content or labeled data examples of that particular behavior in that particular language on that particular content type, i.e. voice in this particular example. It's a lot of particulars.
Right. And Ami, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, content moderation is a very difficult job, not just because of the scale, but at times there is so much of content which stands exactly on that gray line. And just for a simple example, things like humor, sarcasm. So catching that in text is complex. Catching that in voice becomes even further harder. But exactly like Justin said, looking into context or looking into the user profile, the user behavior, it is far easier through an AI model than through a human model like it is done right now. I believe that as more and more experts from both sides, from the tech side and from, let's say, the content speciality side, work together, there will be better evolving solutions that will come on spaces. So a lot more collaboration is required on this side, where the tech community and the activist community kind of works together. So you need the computer sciences and the social sciences to kind of merge and come out with a solution, which has happened in our case scenario. I mean, most of the people from my team are hardcore sociologists. These are people who have done their PhDs on sociology. And then we have Justin's team, which understands data and how to work the two. So we need to kind of merge both the understandings to come up with this solution.
And you're so right about that. We've seen positive examples there in the fight against CSAM material, for example, that required a huge collaborative effort across many different tech companies, social platforms, as well as academia and researchers and social activists.
Right. So speaking of the solution side of these things, so if you have this AI that is able to identify these disruptive, toxic behaviors, what is the end goal of that? Obviously, you get a lot of data collection, but what do you see on the side of the social media platform that is collecting all of this information? Are we trying to get them blocked or kicked off the platform? Are you at Social Media Matters also working on educational materials to do something larger on a societal level about the problem? What are you planning to do with that?
Well, our approach is very simple. Abuse is not a tech problem. It's a human problem. The tool that we are building, it's going in line with what the tech platforms are already trying. Every large tech platform has awesome community guidelines. I have worked on many of these community guidelines with experts across the globe, and it takes hours and hours of discussion to change a word, to add a comma, to change. So it's just like creating a law for the world, or it's that sort of a serious job, and platforms take it very seriously. Again, the community guidelines are beautiful, but the implementation is where the issue kind of comes in, right? So our tool is going to help them further be better at implementing what they want to do, because positive behavior is what is seeked. Social Media Matters, my team completely and totally believes in awareness and positive cyber etiquette. So we are all about that. That is where we come from. And we have been working very closely with human rights activists who are working against caste discrimination, and we continue to do that, plus to do it at a larger platform. I mean, the whole idea behind this interview, when Justin and I was talking, is to raise awareness that there is the problem of caste discrimination. We need to come out with solutions, and the solutions are going to be with the users. Technology is just amplifying our behavior, but where we need to work upon is the core problem. And the problem is far bigger in India offline, because most of Indians are still offline as compared to online. So our work continues in both the spaces. We want to use social media platforms to raise that positive tone of removal of caste discrimination rather than amplification of it.
Yeah, I can't think of a more noble or worthwhile cause of for my team's resources and time than to work on models or behaviors or with folks that are addressing severe problems that impact large swaths of humanity, right? A billion plus people here, that just has a huge impact. But back to your question, Meredith, I would say that from the tech side, the first thing we want to do for these platforms, how they want to use it, or how we would envision anyone using a better way to detect behaviors at scale, is around the data. And specifically what I mean is measurement of prevalence. Like some of the platforms right now, or any platform related to caste discrimination specifically, doesn't really have a good handle on the amount and volume of prevalence of this particular behavior, because there aren't really any models yet for English and Hindi English for this particular behavior that exists anywhere. And that's that's a challenge, right? So before you can as a platform decide to do anything around that behavior or that user or that piece of content, you've got to first be able to detect it, which is why there's so much work that goes up front in terms of the definitions and acquiring the labeled data and the examples and the negative examples of this particular thing. But once you can measure prevalence, then the companies, like as Ami was saying, the companies themselves, the social platforms, can then make decisions around how they enforce that particular behavior. Do they reprimand the user in some way, or potentially do they personalize the content, right? There's all sorts of positive examples that the gaming industry specifically has done a good job on, in terms of using the carrot to shape behaviors versus a negative stick, for example. And then so if step one is measurement of prevalence of the behavior, and step two is then giving that company or that social platform the ability to act, I see the third one being exactly what Ami just talked about, which is education. Now that you can measure this stuff and you can see it, you can start to take action on it, whether it's banning users, banning content, or personalizing the content in a more positive way. Then that helps researchers, social activists like Social Media Matters is doing, and Ami and his team. It helps them go have intelligent conversations, or more intelligent conversations, with actual data points assigned to these behaviors across these platforms, with government officials and local authorities, or the policymakers at these particular social platforms. And that's just they already do a ton of great work, as Ami was saying, but that's just a key part to this whole kind of circle effect that happens once you can measure this behavior.
Those are all really great points. And I actually wanted to circle back, in addition to all the points you just made. Ami, you mentioned when you were speaking earlier about how, I believe you said the majority of Indians still are offline, don't have access to these technologies. I'm wondering if you could provide a little insight into how much do you think that access of certain castes to this technology has an impact on the behaviors that we see? If to word it another way, if more people in India had access to technology, equal access to these platforms, do you think that we would naturally begin to see a change in these behaviors? Or do you think that maybe it would get even more toxic?
Both things will happen. It'll first get more toxic, and then we will start seeing a change because awareness increases. As toxicity increases as well, a lot more people talk about what is wrong. But here we have an opportunity that while, let's say, I think the assumption is 65% of Indians are not online, that they don't have to go through the toxic behavior. If the solution is put in place, we will have different problems when they come online, but they don't have to be the same problems. So here is something that we are creating or trying to create, which can decrease the toxicity towards caste discrimination. And of course, when more people from different castes come online, awareness will increase. But I hope that journey does not have to be through abuse. That journey can be towards positive messaging as well, where social media platforms take the lead in making sure that no caste discrimination is allowed on their platforms, and they have the tools to catch it in time and remove it in time. So just like the gaming industry is working so hard against gender-based discrimination, but it took a whole Gamergate scandal to for the industry to wake up for it. We don't have to wait for something to go massively wrong. We don't need that negativity. And here's a great opportunity in hands of all social media platforms that they can be A, prepared, and B, take a strong stance. Because let's always remember that this is illegal in India, right? I mean, if the Indian government goes hard, like it went hard on negative images of children and sexual imagery there, it also becomes very complex for platforms on the legal space. So it is extremely important that we, and for the platforms as well, to take a strong stance before things get out of hand, and before the larger population is online, that they are already prepared for this solution.
Right, exactly. And I think on that note, I'd like to conclude by asking you each to respond to a question, because I know that everyone here is a passionate believer in the potential for technology to create positive change. So if I ask you, let's say 5 years from now, where do you think that this technology can take us? The AI detection technology and everything that Spectrum Labs is working on with Social Media Matters. What is your goal with regards to both caste discrimination and toxic behavior in general?
Yeah, I can take that one first, Ami, if you want to take a moment to ponder
No,
your
go
response.
ahead, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes to the mission and vision around why we started the company 3 years ago, irrespective of the particular model that we're talking about. Like we, as a company, we have a full set of folks that are very passionate about making the internet a safer and more valuable place for everyone. And by, that valuable piece is so interesting, right? We always talk about the safer side, but by value, what I mean is that each individual, each human, regardless of their race, religion, ethnicity, or caste in this discrimination, or in this particular example, that each human, each person gets the same quality of experience on the internet, right? They get the same access to information. They can be who they are and be who they want to be in different social environments, whether it's social platforms or dating apps or gaming communities or in different marketplaces and what have you, and making that a better experience for everyone. It just sits squarely on it. So, where the tech is headed right now is that I think as an industry, we're getting much smarter, much better around the tools that we develop and the approaches that we take. The industry's done a great job for the first kind of 20 years or so in trust and safety, but you're starting to see this shift right now around moving to a world of semi-automation. And what I mean by that is that in a lot of cases now, a lot of folks are working from home, or in some cases the moderators are being sent home and they don't necessarily have access to all these different systems with this, especially with the coronavirus situation that's going around. global pandemic, right? And so what that means is that it's forced a lot of these companies to maybe in some cases prematurely launch their automated content moderation efforts. And the only ones that can really do it well are the ones who have large labeled data sets for a variety of different behaviors and a variety of different languages for all their different content types. And so, yeah, I think as more positive and negative examples of specific behaviors are captured online through the deployment of different data labeling and data engineering and machine learning techniques, that we'll be able to build up more models and more precise models over time that can detect these particular behaviors. I think where it's all headed next is probably not just text and audio, but on the video side, there's a whole other set of complexity once you start to get into kind of video behaviors and detection of different types of scenarios there. So, as things move more and more to this, I think, isolation-based society that we seem to be moving towards, at least on a temporary basis, there's gonna be a whole bunch of apps that are gonna pop up that are gonna set the stage and the tone for what it means to build a social platform for the next, many years. We're gonna see an evolution or an inflection point in that type of design. And so the moderation tools, they have to scale, right? And it's not gonna be a situation where you can throw a bunch of people at it. You've got to throw tech, and it may be impossible to ever fully automate everything, because how could you ever detect every single bad behavior with a machine by design? But humans can't do it either. And I would argue that the more that we can get humans better tools and focus on kind of the digital wellness and mental health aspect of kind of how they use these platforms, the moderators, and kind of what they have to look at, and the more machines that we can help augment their efforts, then I think that we'll see a much better quality of internet down the road for folks.
Thank you, Justin. And Ami, what do you see 5 years down the road for the future with technology?
Oh, wow. I think we are living in the future if we consider the last 2 weeks of our lives. But I see, I see a true win for what Justin is doing or what I am doing when safety kind of jumps in as one of the most important aspects when it comes to designing or developing an app, a game, or anything. Right now, the safety comes at the end. Once scale is achieved, once things have been, once you're a big company, then you think about safety. I would like us to come on day one. I would like us to come into policy, not just of the company, but of the government, which will lead to us being in the policy of the education aspect of the coders who are coming up. Before you write that first line of code, have you really thought about what will happen to my first 100 users? Just like companies have CEOs and CTOs, they should have a chief safety officer as well, whose only job is that she or he looks into each and every aspect of the company from a safety perspective. It's just like, what Me Too has done to gender, that everybody will think about gender pretty much on day one of their company. They need to think about safety on day one of their game, social media app, or any sort of solution that they are developing. And that would be a true win, where coders are doing a whole section on safety, where they are understanding the social aspects of the technology they are developing. It's a very old statement by Albert Einstein, and I went to university in Germany, and we were taught this again and again, that technology without morals is completely pointless. And I guess that old school of thinking from one of the finest scientists of our century has to be brought in from this perspective. So the solution that Justin and I are coming out with, and many others are trying to work on this, should be the systemic part of the code itself. It's just like the UX and the UI, the user experience, cannot just be the colors and the swiftness and the frictionlessness of an app. They also have to be the safety of the app. It happened in many industries. If we look into the car industry, if we look into the travel industry, the consumption industry of food. So I'm pretty sure now is the time when it is shifting towards the tech industry as well. And just like Justin said, I mean, the last 2 weeks, the city I live in is very special as well, because most of the moderation of the world happens in Gurgaon, where I live. So I can tell you, I know these moderators, their mental health, them working from home. There are lots of issues which will be actually overcome if AI is used as a positive tool, and even small companies can think about it. And this value also has to be added for small scale apps. If this solution becomes universal, then it can also be attained by apps which are smaller companies rather than the larger tech firms. Yeah. So I don't know if that was a vision or a dream, but I see it going in that direction. I really hope that it goes in that direction.
Thank you.
Well, let's make it happen.
Just said, Justin, if you want to jump in.
I was just gonna say, let's. I agree completely, and let's make it happen.
I think you touched on something really important. It's a big issue. It's a change in mindset. It's a shift in how we structure these platforms in general and where we place value when we're building these platforms. And also the education and awareness piece is so big, not only in the online world, but in the real world as well. You can't separate the two. So I appreciate you coming on today and all of the insight and information you shared with us. Would you like to let our listeners know where they can find you for more information and social media matters?
I mean, the website is socialmediamatters.in, IN for India, and we are present on all social media platforms. On Twitter, we go by @sociallyblog, and would love to interact and learn and get constructive criticism from everybody who's heard our discussion over here. So would love that interaction.
Great, thank you so much. And we'll also include that information in the show notes. So Amitabh Kumar from Social Media Matters and Justin Davis from our very own Spectrum Labs, thank you so much for being here. And we will see you next time on The Brief.